Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, we're joined by Hanh Tat, who is an author of the book Life as a Jigsaw Puzzle, a little book about love, and a spiritual teacher who uses practices like Qigong and meditation to promote holistic health, vitality, and raise consciousness. Be prepared to learn the art of forgiveness and how to forgive yourself and others, what self-love actually means and why it's not soft, the concept of universal love and how this differs from romantic love, how to feel feelings without casting judgment or reacting, and so much more. Before that though, this episode is brought to you by Riverside. Riverside is an online studio designed to record, edit, and share high-quality podcasts built for growth from day one. Powered by AI, you can record in 4K video or from your phone and automatically remove filler words such as ums, as, you knows, and many other speech patterns. Built for human conversations, Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast. That sounds great. Ready to start your podcast? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside and get a 15%, yes, I say 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now, on to today's episode. Hanh, welcome to Raising Consciousness Day. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm really good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well. Looking forward to our conversation today and learning all about your work and the book that you wrote as well. But my first question sometimes catches my guests off guard, I guess, because I'm always fascinated by who people are. So my first question for you is, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so I cheated. I watched some of your other videos, and so as you'll already know from some of your previous guests, this simplest of questions can lead to the most profoundest of answers. So I'm gonna keep it the simple surface level one for now, and that is, I guess I'm a bit of an anomaly compared to your other guests in the sense that I'm not a qualified practitioner or expert on any of the things I'm going to talk to you about. What I am is a regular person who had a regular 9-to-5 job, couple of kids, was married, and I went through a really challenging time that led me onto my own journey of knowledge seeking and self-discovery, and ultimately led to post-traumatic growth, which involved me writing, like I said, my book, and then leaving my 26-year corporate IT career to try a different flavor of life. And now I have this desire to use the experience I'd gone through and everything I subsequently learned in order to help people see how much agency we have over our own thoughts and emotions, and hence our lives, and how we can use that to navigate our life's challenges with more ease and grace so that we can get more out of life and see that life happens for us and not to us, even when the chips are down. So that's me in a nutshell.
And what's the work that you do today? So you said there you left your corporate career. So what's the work you do today, and why does that work matter?
So I'm actually sort of on sabbatical, almost like going back to university. I'm learning a whole bunch of stuff. Like yourself, I guess, I'm learning, so despite our age gap, I'm learning as I go and sharing as I go. And I'm learning all sorts of stuff, continuing from where I left off, when I started. So I've been learning about the gene keys, which I know you've been learning about human design. So the gene keys builds on top of that, so it's extra layer. I've been learning about hand analysis, all sorts of stuff I'm following my breadcrumbs that my soul's kind of guiding me towards, and it's leading me to fascinating places, learning about myself. So that's where I am now. But in terms of how I use my experience to help other people, I like to share my story because I believe that stories have the power to heal. And when we hear other people's experiences, it can often ignite something within us, remind us something that we weren't aware of. When something resonates and you feel like that, inside you, I know what she's talking about. And it's like there's a flicker of a memory that you just weren't aware of. And that leads you onto your own, questions and curiosities that then opens your own consciousness in your mind and understanding. So I share my story, and that's what I'd like to do today, if that's all right, Luke.
Yeah, absolutely. So where does your story and this, I guess, the growth that you've kind of experienced, where does that begin? And yeah, what were the key pillars that you kind of picked out from your journey and your story so far?
Yeah, yeah, okay. Well, I guess the first, I'll start kind of just to put into context. The first 45 years of my life were pretty regular. You know, I was very studious at school, so I studied hard at school and university. I got myself good grades. I got myself a good job, progressed up the career ladder, and then settled down. Had a couple of kids, got married. You know, as you do, following that societal norm. But I want to make a point. Like, it's not like I was just following that and I was bored one day, got bored and, you know, started seeing this, you know, the light and stuff. It was, I've lived an incredibly blessed and rich life. I've done so much traveling and I've been on so many adventures, snowboarding, surfing and climbing, and I've met such wonderful, wonderful people along the way. So I've really got nothing to complain about. I loved those first 45 years of my life. But if I'm completely honest, towards the end, I started asking, you know, I started feeling like I'm sure there's something more I'm supposed to be here for. There's something more I need to do. And I was starting to ask those questions, but I guess I wasn't asking them sincerely enough because the universe and life decided to give me a kick up the backside. And I had a rude awakening, you know, kind of when in February 2020, 3 weeks before lockdown, I discovered that my now ex-husband was having an affair. And it wasn't a fling or a one-off thing, but like a situation where he was living a double life essentially, and lying and deceiving me. And when you hear people say these things, you think, how could they not know? How you know? And I asked myself the same question. I'm like, blooming heck, I'm an intelligent woman. How on earth did I not know? But I guess when you love and trust someone, you don't see the things you're supposed to see. And so, because I didn't know, it hit me bam like a wrecking ball. You know, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. My mind was in absolute chaos, just trying to work out how it'd gone wrong and you know where it could have happened. And my emotions were all over the place in absolute turmoil. I felt a deep, deep rage and an anger I never knew was possible for me to feel, and I felt such a deep, deep sadness and grief at the loss of my marriage. Well, a loss of my family unit actually was that was the main thing. My whole worldview was flipped upside down, and my whole sense of reality turned out to be just an illusion. But I do believe that we live in a benevolent universe. I believe that life equips us with what we need to go through the experiences that we're meant to go through in this lifetime. And for me, what that looked like was, you know, my family and I were Chinese, but we were born in Vietnam, and we came to the UK as refugees when I was 4 years old in the late 70s. And that journey here was incredibly treacherous. You know, many people lost their lives at sea trying to escape oppression. But my family and I, we were blessed. We were picked up by a British ship and brought safely to the UK, albeit with just the clothes on our backs. And after we got here, my parents worked every hour God sent in order to provide for us. And even though, you know, we were very incredibly poor, they made sure we never went hungry. And that kind of starting life give you a real appreciation for the little things like a roof over your head and food in your belly. And so, you know, it was that gave me the resilience and fortitude to carry on as much as normal, given that it was lockdown and COVID and we were homeschooling. Because I think if it wasn't for that, I don't think I would have managed it as well as I did. So, you know, I'm eternally grateful for that. But despite all this, though, my nervous system was completely shot to pieces. It was completely dysregulated, and the smallest thing would trigger a panic attack within me, where I'd have like palpitations, and you know, I'd feel like the blood was draining out of my body. And one day, I had, you know, I started seeing stars, and I thought there was something seriously wrong with me. I was with my boys. I was like, boys, mummy's just got to lie down a minute, and I was there for a good half an hour before these stars subsided. And afterwards, I was straight on the internet trying to work out, you know, what it was. And it just turned out to be acute stress and anxiety. And I was absolutely gobsmacked because I never knew that those things could cause such a physiological reaction. You know, growing up, I knew about physical health. I knew how to look after my body. I'd always eaten well and exercised. But we weren't taught about mental and emotional health at school as kids. And my parents didn't know, bless them. So I had to start learning it for myself as an adult. And once I started, oh wow, I loved it. I kind of was listening to podcast talk after talk, and when I was cooking, cleaning, whenever I wasn't looking after the boys, and the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. When I was learning about everything, psychology, neuroscience, holistic health, how to integrate it all into our bodies, to how to heal ourselves from trauma as well. And it was just my mind just went poo 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 every day. I was listening to something else that led me to something else. It's fantastic. But with all learning, I think there's sometimes the greatest teacher in life is life itself, right? and for me, some of the things that kind of were prominent, it was things like the importance of perspective taking, and that for me was became kind of in stark contrast when I was confronted with my own anger and rage. And after several weeks of feeling it, it started to feel like it was draining my life force, like it was eating me up inside. And I just knew that I needed to do something. I knew it wasn't sustainable. So I knew that I had a decision to make. I could choose my own happiness. I got to choose how I was going to perceive what had happened, and respond to it. And I knew that if I was to see it as something he did to me, he cheated on me, this so and so. Of course, I wasn't using such polite language at the time, but that would have rendered me a victim of my circumstances, powerless to do anything about it. It would have kept me trapped in my bitterness and resentment, unable to move on. Whereas I knew if I was to just take a step back and just see it as something he did, he simply had an affair. He didn't do it deliberately to hurt me. It was just something he needed to do for himself. He's not a bad man. He just made some terrible, terrible decisions. And being able to think, take that perspective allowed me to be able to move on in a more purposeful and empowered way for myself and for my family. And so I think you can apply that to everything in life. If we take a step back and kind of look at the bigger picture, it allows us to make decisions from a higher place. So there was that. And I guess from that anger led me to the importance of forgiveness, because the two go hand in hand. You can't truly let go of your anger unless you forgive, but equally you can't start to forgive unless you've processed your anger sufficiently. And so when I talk about forgiveness, it's not about forgetting or condoning what the other person's done. It's simply releasing the resentment towards them because of it. And so we forgive not for the other person, but for ourselves, to free ourselves from the shackles of our own thoughts and emotions that keep us trapped, so that we can move on more purposefully. So that was the importance of forgiveness. But then the most important thing for me, the most pivotal and transformational thing for me, was learning about self-love. And I know kind of for some people, especially my generation, I mean, I'll be 50 in a couple of months' time, so kind of people my generation a bit older, the idea of talking about self-love is still a little bit cheesy. I know you youngsters are kind of more used to that vernacular nowadays, but for me, kind of self-love is essentially, it's not some narcissistic or self-centered or egotistical attitude, but it's about treating ourselves the way we would treat a loved one. And for me, it was about learning to become my own best friend, so I could be there for myself in my own time of need. And and one more thing before I go on into self-love is love itself, the definition of love, because I think generally in society there is a tendency to limit love to romantic love because of Hollywood movies and romance novels, but love is so much more expanded. When we give love the widest scope possible, so that we include not just partners and like romantic partners and our loved ones, but we include ourselves, and we include people we know, people we don't know, and the whole of humanity. And when we give love the broadest definition possible, so it's not just like that loving feeling we have when we're holding a loved one, but we use it as an umbrella term for all of the loving ways of being, such as kindness and compassion. generosity and forgiveness and empathy, all those good things. And we were, love then becomes virtually unbounded, and we can apply it to all areas in our lives. And so for me, self-love includes all of those loving ways of being. So it's self-compassion and kindness and patience and generosity towards ourselves. And so once I learned about self-love, I reflected back on my own life, and I noticed all the ways where not intentionally, but unintentionally, I wasn't particularly loving towards myself. How, I had, kind of, I looked at my negative self-talk, and I would call myself stupid if I got something wrong. Oh, you stupid woman. And it was never in a nasty or spiteful way, but it just wasn't very helpful, right? It wasn't very supportive of myself. And I noticed that when I made a mistake, I'd really beat myself up about it and get really annoyed with myself, and it would linger. I noticed how I'd, over time, I'd really, especially in my younger years at university, I pushed myself to the point of self-imposed anxiety and stress to get the achievements I wanted to achieve. Now, I don't look, I wouldn't change any of that. I wouldn't take away from any of my achievements, because they've got me to where I am and who I am today. But it's that whole thing of Maya Angelou said something along the lines of, we do our best until we know better, and when we know better, we do better, right? And now I know better, and also I'm kind of perimenopausal, and so I don't tolerate stress as well as I used to. I think especially with following the trauma of the the affair, and so I don't push myself as much as I used to. But that's not to say I don't, because when you're trying to change 5 decades of conditioning, you sometimes forget. So I still do, but just not quite as much as I used to. So yeah.
Just on that point,
Yeah.
sorry, there's like so many points there, and we'll probably like circle back around and then come back onto self-love a bit more deeper as well. But if we go back to so I wanted to pick up on the perspective and the forgiveness piece. So how long did it take you to reach that perspective and to come into that vibration of forgiveness? Because a lot of times, something bad might happen in our lives, obviously in your situation, and our instant reaction isn't necessarily to instantly fall into this kind of state of, or this higher perspective. So I'm kind of interested in how long it took you to come to these realizations and what you're sharing with us today, if that makes sense. Was there any key steps along that part of your journey that helped you to come to that realization and then to help you to forgive, if that makes sense?
Yes. So in terms of the perspective taking, I think having children, kind of almost forced me to look at the bigger picture, because when you are a mother or a parent, your instinct is to do what's best for your family, what's best for the children that you've brought into the world. And so even though I knew that, because once the trust has gone, that for me that's a deal breaker, and so there was no going back. But I knew I still needed to do what was best for my children, and so he was always going to be their dad, and he was always going to be in their lives, which meant he was always going to be in my life. So I had to dig deep within myself to find it within myself, to transcend how I was feeling inside, so that I could be amicable with him. So, because we needed to homeschool, and so I needed to kind of to make sure that the boys didn't see what I was feeling inside, and so that what I was feeling inside didn't translate to unhelpful behaviors on the outside, because children can pick up on that. And so I needed to make sure for them, that I wasn't, putting out negative, kind of attitudes and behaviors towards him, because they would pick upon it. And like I said, I wanted to make sure that they had the continuity and stability that they deserved and that they needed. And I think that helped me, kind of in a way forced me to make those higher decisions without necessarily thinking about it too much. And I suppose now I can look back and it was my intuition, but at the time I didn't really know much about intuition. So I was kind of just going on what felt right, what resonated within me. I was just following, just, I guess we just have internal wisdom, right? And I guess being slightly older as well, I was 45 at the time. I'd already lived sufficiently, gotten enough life experience to know how to make good decisions. So I don't know whether necessarily in my younger years I would have been able to that quickly make that, take the right perspective. But then in terms of taking the perspective in terms of the anger, I guess inherent, I've always had a drive to look after myself. And again, maybe that's another intuition thing, but I kind of wasn't aware of at the time. But when I started to feel like, this anger is starting to really affect me negatively, it was just, it kind of forced my hand in a way, because I knew that if I didn't do something about it, it would lead me to places that I didn't want to go. And so it must have been, I'm trying to think of the timelines. I think it was about 6 or 7 weeks, which I guess in a way doesn't sound that long, but it was lockdown and COVID and stuff. So maybe, I don't know, sense of time was different to, if I'd had, yeah, I mean, I was still working, but I wasn't, if in a physical office. And so maybe being in that environment meant I had more time to process what was going on.
So just on that point, Han, so that's interesting, because a lot of people, and maybe a lot of people that I kind of see, and even in certain parts in my life, we kind of hold on to this, whether it's jealousy or anger or frustration, or and we're not towards others, right? And we're not able to forgive them and forgive ourselves, right? And this kind of whole kind of forgiveness piece is almost like a dark cloud kind of over us that can go on for much longer than 6 to 7 weeks. So when we're talking about forgiveness, and let's just say we're unable to forgive ourselves and others, especially if we feel hurt, and that goes on for a prolonged period of time, do you think that it's then harder to then come into the state of like forgiveness and actually that higher perspective? And what would your words of wisdom be to people who maybe have been in that state of resentment for a prolonged period of time, based on what you went through and what you learned, if that makes sense? Because I think, as you said, 6 to 7 weeks is a very, although probably not nice for you in that sense, but I'm sure we all know people that have this resentment towards, well, just life itself, maybe, have that victim mindset that goes on for years and centuries, or decades, sorry. And like, that's their life, that becomes all that they know. So if they come across this podcast and we're talking about forgiveness, it's like a completely different world to them, because that's not where they're at, if that makes sense.
Yes. So I'm trying to think, because it was quite a few years ago now. So I think it was a combination of who I already was, what I already knew, but also what I was learning. So at the time, I was learning about all the psychology of it as well. So, kind of, but then I was also, this is when I first started learning about spirituality as well. So it was a combination of the two that really allowed me to see things from a wider perspective and a bigger picture. And I guess this is a little bit sort of, kind of what led to my book. And actually, I'll come to my book a little later on, because chronologically it comes later on. But I was listening to things where, the things of like regrets of the dying, or when you, by the end of your life, what's really going to have mattered. And if we, as a soul, one of the things I did learn, and in addition to all the psychology, because the psychology is incredibly helpful, because that actually, if you hold on to those resentments, all it does is it affects you mentally and emotionally. And so if you're going to choose happiness, and I guess it all circles back to self-love as well, actually, because this is my life, and if I love myself, I want myself to be happy. And so if choosing forgiveness will then allow me to access that happiness, then it's almost like if I hold on to resentment and bitterness, and actually I'm just cutting off my nose to spite my face, if that makes sense. So even though our, kind of, I suppose, our more primitive mind and emotions wants to hold on to that anger because it kind of feels right. We've been hurt. We want to protect ourselves. It's our right to be angry. When you realize, actually, yeah, but I have a choice. I can either hold on to this and be miserable, or I can learn Even if it's going to be hard, I can learn to let it go and then move on to happiness. And then, so when you take that wider perspective, it's like, okay, well, I might feel like I want to just be really angry now. And I'm not saying that I'm always like that, because there are times, even now, even a few years later, I've done all this work, stuff will happen and it will trigger some like really deep emotion, emotional wound in me. And I find it really hard to let go. And sometimes even trying really hard. And it's just a case of reminding yourself and looking at that bigger picture. What do I want for myself? What do I want? I want to be happy. I want to be free. And freedom is, for me, is inner freedom. It's liberation from being being a prisoner of our own thoughts and emotions, and feeling like, actually, I am the one. And this is when self-love, when you've been on the self-love journey long enough, you realize that true love, joy, and happiness doesn't come from out there in other people, but from deep within the very core of our being, that we already are all that we desire. We already have all that we seek, that kind of thing. We have that place of wholeness. But anyway, I'm going off topic a little bit, but circling back to your question, I think it's all of that, and it's not easy. Sometimes it just takes practice. And I think the main thing, is compassion, is self-compassion. That you're gonna have to make quite a few mistakes before you get it right at times, kind of thing. We're all learning. We're all kind of like taking baby steps, learning how to walk, and then thinking we're getting the hang of it, and then we fall on our bums, being triggered left, right, and center, and then but eventually everyone learns to walk eventually, no matter how many times they land on their bums, right? So if we just see it as a journey, and each time we're challenged, we have a decision to make. And okay, it might take us a few goes before we find how we are able to make decisions from a higher place. If we are aware of it, the awareness initially, that initial awareness of it at least, is the first step. And then if you already understand, okay, well, I know intellectually, if I let go of the resentment, then I can find happiness. And sometimes the intellectual understanding alone is not sufficient for you to make those decisions in that point in time. And you just have to give yourself time. Sometimes you just have to sit with your anger, sit with your resentment, and feel it and allow it to be, and accept it. Don't push it away. Don't try and bury it down. Don't suppress it, because the only way through to our elevated emotions is to be able to have the capacity to feel those deep, difficult emotions and uncomfortable ones. And as we sit with them and accept them and honor them and let them be, they actually eventually percolate through our system, because emotions are essentially just energy in motion. And if we don't fear them, and we can learn to process them in the right way, because they're just telling us, they're just messengers here to tell us something we need to know. And often we can just, if we just sit with them, like I said, and let them percolate, often you might have to give it a bit of time, but they do kind of work themselves out, especially if you open your heart and open your mind. Give yourself time to open your mind and open your heart, and allow love in.
So a couple of points on that. So there was a podcast that I was listening to, and the host of that show was on the point of emotions and feelings, was saying that one of the skills that to cultivate is to be able to come to a place and learn to feel feelings and emotions without, I don't want to mess it up, but it was something like without casting judgment on them, or reacting to them. And I think like so often, like that's a challenge that a lot of us face, so anger might come up and we just without conscious kind of reckoning, just react to it. We just have this anger and just like comes out of us without that kind of conscious control over it. And I think what you're sharing there about developing that innate ability, that skill to become aware of our emotions and our feelings without casting judgment on them, like, oh, I feel anger, this is good or bad, or I feel anger and just letting it out like straight away, can lead to well, in my experience, not a lot of good kind of situations. But if we are able to develop that skill of becoming more emotionally aware and sitting with them, as you're saying, that can actually teach us a lot about ourselves. And then another thing I kind of came across was around, so let's just take anger because it's come up a few times. And again, I don't want to mess this up, but I was listening to something that was sharing how, like, anger and a lot of our emotions are kind of fleeting in a way. An event might happen and we feel angry by it, but how long does that anger, like the actual emotion, like the actual feeling of anger, how long does that actually stay? And his point was that sometimes it's our own, like, we prolong the anger, basically. That's like his message that he was sharing, rather than allowing us to feel the feeling, feel the emotion, and then just almost like let it go. But it's like our ability to, this is probably a mind thing, an ego thing, maybe prolong the anger that then oftentimes causes a lot of our suffering. And I've always for the last few years, not always, that's a bit of a lie, tried to use emotions and feelings as like a feedback tool. So a couple of things that I wanted to share on emotions and feelings and that. Do you have any other kind of thoughts on that? And then I did want to move on to self-love as well, because there is this kind of although self-love is becoming more accepted, still a little bit of a, especially I guess or maybe more for males, this kind of idea that self-love is like soft, and that we got to like power through and stuff. So would love to get your thoughts on that. Like, is self-love soft? And yeah, if you have any other kind of words of wisdom to share on kind of what I was saying there about emotions and feelings. We'll get back talking to Han in just one moment, but before we do so, I would just like to take a quick break to mention Soma Breath. Soma Breath is a holistic school and community with no single guru, where you get to learn a range of pranayama breathing techniques and discover the power of breath work tailored to your specific needs. Their holistic approach to health is currently being studied by Cambridge University. And the thing that I love about Soma is that they combine ancient wisdom with modern science, which is very fitting for this podcast, don't you think, to help us all achieve holistic health. From their online courses to membership to certification programs, you have everything that you need to improve your health with a community right by your side. Get started on your Soma Breath journey today by visiting the link in the show note description and experiencing the transformation for yourself. Now, let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite a fiery person, so I understand what you mean about, because I have big emotions. I was a very sensitive kid, and I wasn't really, my generation weren't necessarily allowed to express our emotions, kind of, and often it felt like they weren't accepted. So I've had to go on my own journey to learn about these things, and so, I still, and there's so much to talk about when it comes to that. So. I'm conscious of times there's quite a few, we could always pick up on other stuff, but there are certain things that really help us. So just understanding ourselves more, and that takes time as well. So understanding the makeup of our thoughts and how they then trigger our emotions and how it can lead to a spiral and whatnot. All of that helps, but it takes time to understand. So if you are, I'm trying to think. There's tools, and there's the understanding of the subconscious mind and how that's all played up, and how things in your childhood would have created certain ways you think and feel. So, and I mean, you're probably aware of this already, but our thoughts are predominantly arise from our subconscious mind. It's something along the lines of 70 to 90% of them, and so and our subconscious mind is made up of our conditioning, and so that includes of all our limiting beliefs. And the subconscious brain basically is just in the background way, and it works so quickly because it's just it's looking out for danger, or its perceptions of danger based on the past. So if stuff happened to us as a kid that made us feel anxious when we were a kid, that would have baked into our subconscious mind, and so it's looking out for danger. So when a conversation or something looks like it's leading that way, it will then trigger a thought in our mind, and then it'll trigger emotion. It happens so quickly, you're not even aware of it. And that's why often you'll find that someone will say something kind of that they think is innocuous, and suddenly before you know you're in a row. You're like, how did that happen? And that's usually kind of so there's that side of it. And so that side of it is kind of essentially when you start to do inner work, you go back and you use all these like IFS, so internal family systems, and you can use RTT, so rapid transformation therapies, things like that. And that I learned about that I use for my own inner work to try and clear my own kind of little limiting beliefs and stuff from my past to help me not get triggered so easily by those things. So that's kind of the kind of child's psychology kind of it. And that's a bigger conversation in itself, but in a nutshell, there's that. But there's also understanding where you are at a given point in time in terms of your nervous system. So, especially if you've been through trauma or if you've been through a stressful time that you've not been able to really understand. Let me show you. This is the window of tolerance. I printed it off. I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Let me just see if I can. But basically,
I'll link it in the comment, in the show description as well.
Yeah, so for those who are listening, it's basically just a graphical depiction of the states that the nervous system can flip between. And so you've got the green bit, which is that rest and digest bit, which is the area where our bodies are just doing what they should do, where it's operating optimally, and that's where healing takes place. And then at the top you have a band, the red band. It's the fight or flight stress response, and this is where we kind of get triggered into anger or fear or anxiety. And then the bottom there's the black section, which is kind of the freeze section, where if sometimes let's say someone passes away, a loved one passes away, and the emotions are so empowering, overwhelming that we can't fight, we can't flee, all we do is freeze, and you just find yourself there. And the idea is that our nervous system should naturally be able to flip between those three states. So we see this in nature when a deer is being chased by a predator, and then it manages to escape. But then afterwards, it kind of just shakes itself off and then starts eating grass again as if nothing has happened. And that's how we're supposed to operate. But what happens is, in modern day life, we often find that we are in the red zone more than we really should be. And if we find ourselves there, that's when it can lead to, burnout and nervous breakdown. And then down at the bottom, if we find ourselves in the freeze zone for too long, that's where it can lead to depression. And so we can understand where we are in that window, and we can learn to expand the green area, the rest and digest area, through doing things that help ourselves get back to the parasympathetic rest and digest state, and that's managing our stress level, kind of going out in nature, grounding, exercise, eating well, all those good things, and kind of managing our circadian rhythm and good sleep hygiene. But then we can actually widen that green zone by using things like hormesis. So I think one of your other guests talked about this, but just very briefly, applying hormetic stressors in our lives, which are like minor stressors like exercise and intermittent fasting, time restricted eating, and just things like that to just help us help our system learn to tolerate bigger stressors. And so we widen that window so that we don't find ourselves flitting back and forth. And the reason why that is helpful is it just has when we have this picture in our mind and we find ourselves in the red zone, we notice it, right? We have that awareness. Oh yes, I'm getting triggered regularly, and there's something I'm not looking after myself well enough. I need to take more time to get myself back into the green zone, and then that helps as well. So kind of all of that together will help us to remain calmer, and so we don't get triggered so easily. So I don't know if that helps. And then shall I?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's great. And I'll link that graphic down below for people. But yeah, on the topic of self-love, so there is kind of like this in some sectors, this kind of feeling that or this message that self-love in some sort of way maybe is more for males, and that's kind of why I see it and kind of Yeah.
Yeah.
I've come across it that self-love is soft and, you know, just to push through. And so what's your thoughts on kind of that and experience with that? And yeah,
Yeah.
for those that have that approach to
Yeah.
self-love, and if self-love is soft or not.
For me, it's not. It's definitely not soft. And this is coming from someone who has pushed. I've pushed myself my entire life. It's just my nature, actually. And this is just a side topic. Is that I've known. I know from like my hand analysis and my gene keys that actually it is my nature to be. I'm on the go all the time. My brain's going ping, 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 and I want to do my best at everything. But I think also, as a child, kind of feeling a need to prove myself is also, so I know about pushing and striving and stuff. So as a recovering perfectionist and high achiever, I would say no, self-love is definitely not soft, because actually I think often it's insufficient self-love that then leads people to kind of maybe not treat treat other people as kindly as they would if they were able to give themselves that love. That whole thing of hurt people. And so if a person is feeling, not happy with who they are on the inside, that will translate, on the outside. And it's like that thing of what Wayne Dyer said, what happens if you squeeze an orange, what comes out? It's orange juice, right? So what's on the inside comes out if it's put under pressure. So if we can nurture what's on the inside when we're put under pressure, then what gets squeezed out comes out. So if we nurture love on the inside and we get put under pressure, then what comes out is love, right? And so whereas and so that's why for me self-love is no way soft at all. And if I go back to it, for me it was like, well, you know how pain becomes our power and our purpose, because I felt such inner turmoil, and I felt such a desire for inner peace, that the decision and the commitment to become my own best friend, and to commit to self-love, it was just a no-brainer, because I knew that that's what I needed in order to be there for myself, in order to give myself what I needed at the time. And so that's what we do. We commit to ourselves to get to, to be our own best friend, so that we can give ourselves what we need. And what we need is going to look different for each and every one of us, and different for individuals as we go along our lives. But when we get to know ourselves, we spend the time and the energy to understand our thoughts and emotions, get curious about them, wonder where these thoughts come from, and why am I feeling this way? How can I help myself? What's this emotion trying to tell me? The more we get to know ourselves, and the better we can take care of ourselves. And so we learn to comfort ourselves when we're feeling upset. We learn to soothe ourselves when we're feeling pain. We learn to motivate ourselves in loving ways rather than trying to just push through. And we learn to, kind of pick ourselves back up when it feels like life's knocked us to the ground. And we take ourselves lovingly by the hand, knowing that we'll never intentionally forsake, abandon, or reject ourselves. And that's not to say we won't do it unintentionally, because, we're still going to fall back to conditioned behaviors, right? But at least we have an awareness of it, and we show ourselves compassion if we make mistakes, and we carry on with love in our hearts. And then when we can do that, we because the fact of the matter is, and this is really cheesy to say and obvious, but we're the only people that are with ourselves 24/7, from our very first breath to the very last gasp, right? And so we might as well enjoy our own company. And then once we cultivate this self-love and make this commitment, we realize that it is a privilege to be us, a privilege to have this life, and this is by design. We are who we are by design. We are meant to be who we are, and we are meant to find our own authenticity and our own unique frequency. Because if you take it from a wider perspective of consciousness and the infinite nature and eternal nature of consciousness, we are all unique because of that infinite nature. And so it's by each and every one of us finding our own unique frequencies collectively, the whole becomes complete. You see what I mean? And so then what happens is, when we understand that actually our differences are, what makes consciousness complete is adds towards the infinite nature of consciousness, and allows consciousness to see itself through us and express itself through us and as us. We then are no longer afraid of other people. So at the moment, often when people see others as different, it creates fear and it creates separation. Whereas when you see that other people are different for a purpose, it's by design, you then embrace your own differences and you embrace their differences, and together we come together as a whole, and that's when the whole becomes can work together. And so that's where it leads to collaboration and unity and oneness, rather than separation and division. And so this all comes from essentially us working on ourselves, to love ourselves, because what happens is, as we cultivate this self-love, we create an overflow. We fill our own cups and we create an overflow that then allows us to take that out into the world, through our words and through our actions. And we learn to catch ourselves, rather than we start to notice when we're actually not being our highest selves, right? When we're getting triggered, and then we take the time, because we love ourselves and we love others, that we take the time to do the inner work to help ourselves not become triggered, to understand ourselves. And actually, once you work things through, and have like the acceptance and integration of all our shadows, integration of all those parts of us that we've rejected because we were told they were wrong. They actually, like if you do IFS, those parts, as it were, the firefighters and the managers, they kind of, and the protectors, they stand down. They don't feel the need to protect ourselves anymore, because that's all it is. When someone triggers us, it's because we feel unsafe within our body. We feel unsafe psychologically or emotionally, and so we react. The part of us that is feeling triggered reacts to protect us. But then when you can work through that, and you and self-love is basically the foundation of it. It allows you to then realize, okay, I'm safe, and you take charge. Basically, you learn slowly to take charge of your thoughts and your emotions, and have that agency, and those triggered parts of you learn slowly to stand down, and you, that's not to say you still don't get triggered. I mean, I get triggered on a daily basis by my kids, bless them. So that's what I'm currently working on, is how to not get triggered by a 14-year-old who just kind of is not listening to anything I'm saying. But
Right, yeah.
so
The challenges of parenthood, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So spoke about self-love. In terms of, because within your book, there's like this, and you've alluded to it a little bit throughout our conversation, especially at the beginning, viewing love as a universal love. And I think a lot of people, as you said, when we think of love, okay, we kind of have love within, well, I guess mostly within like a romantic kind of sense, although there's probably and so romantic and family, right? I think, when most people think love, they kind of think family setting, and they think romantic love. What's the difference between those quote unquote loves and the concept that you share and you talk about in the book, universal love? And why do you think there is kind of like this in society, this kind of misunderstanding around universal love, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So if I can, in our book, it's called Life as a Jigsaw Puzzle, and so the analogy I use is, if we were to see our lives as a jigsaw puzzle made up of billions of pieces, each one representing a decision we've made or an action we've taken, and our puzzle itself is part of a universal collective puzzle composed of those of every individual on the planet, what would it look like? And so this puzzle of ours, we don't have the box, so we don't know what we're working towards, or even how many pieces they're going to be. But we have the ability to consciously curate it based on the way we show up, the way we live our lives, the way we treat ourselves, and the way we treat others. How would we want it to look? And if by learning to become our highest selves, our best selves, we were able to create the most glorious version of this jigsaw puzzle, and our own growth and evolution then contributed to the most glorious version of this universal global picture, the evolution of the whole of humanity. You know, how would we live our lives differently if we were to look at life through that lens? And it all starts with kind of, you know, that self-love and love in the highest sense. Like when you get to the end of your life and your completed picture fits into that picture of the, you know, the global universal jigsaw puzzle, you know, what contribution would you like to have made towards that? And so when you zoom out and look at it in that way, it really changes the way we think and feel and act and the things that seem important to us. And you focus less on the minuscule kind of things that, you know, really aren't significant, you know, if you zoom out. And you're able to take that bigger, higher picture and think, okay, I'm working towards something that, you know, is of my own highest good, but also the highest good of all. And so it's kind of that's, I don't know if that, that answers your question. And I guess this was where spirituality comes in, because in spirituality, as we understand that we're not separate individuals. We're, you know, with this whole thing of we're souls having a human experience in order for consciousness to know itself. And you know, when we understand that we're all connected energetically, we're all connected, we start to see each other as a whole. You know, the whole of humanity and all the beings on the planet, and even Gaia herself. You know, we're all part of the ecosystem that, you know, builds that. We're all microcosms of the macrocosm of you know, infinite and eternal consciousness. And so, like I said, that allows us to see life less from a you know, individualistic perspective. And that's not to say we don't honor the individual. We still honor ourselves and our diversity and our uniqueness, but always in the knowing that we fit into a bigger picture. And that allows us to see a bigger sense of who we are, how we fit into things, and how our decisions you know, ripple out. And so, you know, Paula, I can't remember her name, her surname, she, you know, the bee lady, she was talking about how bees, yeah, how bees understand this thing, that they are part of this collective, and that's essentially what we are as humans. You know, we are part of the collective, but we've forgotten because of the veil of forgetfulness, and you know, this feeling that growing up that, you know, we're separate. But when you realize that actually no, you know, like Daniel Siegel talks about MWE, so MWE, which is the me in the we, and he talks about intraconnectedness, not just interconnectedness, but how we are all intricately interconnected, intraconnected in, you know, as a collective. And you start to listen to all these things, and the more you listen, you think, yeah, I know that makes sense. You can just feel it in your heart, it just resonates. You know it's true. And you don't even need convincing, because that wisdom, the wise part of you inside in your heart, in your solar plexus, in your being, knows it's true, even if your intellectual mind struggles to kind of to understand it. And you know, I flip between the two still. I'm not some enlightened, you know, kind of being, because I'm kind of, you know, I zoom out, big picture, one love, all that, and then I'm back in the throes of life. I'm like, oh, you know, kind of thing. So it's just getting to the point where it's integrated, and it's integrated not just intellectually, but, you know, embodied. It's getting to the point where you embody
embodied.
Yeah.
Interesting. And thank you for that. What's one thing that we didn't? I mean, I know that we're going to do another episode on probably a bit more tactical in terms of the practices and stuff that you've integrated that's helped you to maybe come to a lot of these realizations, to lower stress and everything, you know, EFT, etc., that I definitely want to focus on. But thank you for sharing your story, your journey, etc. What's one thing throughout your journey, your story, that we didn't touch upon today that you think is a key was a key event in your journey, in your story up to this point, that you've also learned some big lessons that you would like to share in the in the time that we have left?
So I guess I'm trying to think. So that the last message so we'll talk about all the other stuff later, but there's a couple of things. It's like whatever we do now, I think when we look at the bigger picture, we realize that evolution of humanity takes a long time. So whatever we do in this lifetime, we're sowing seeds, not necessarily to expect to reap the rewards for ourselves in our lifetimes, but we do so in order for humanity to reap the rewards and harvest at some point in its lifetime, no matter how many generations that takes. And so when we look at things like that, we're not always just thinking about what we're going to get out of it. We're thinking longer term, bigger picture for the whole of society. And so, and then my final thought for today anyway is to leave people with, I guess, a reminder to lean into love. And I'm going to say this as much for myself as anyone else. And it's to lean into that expansive love that encompasses all beings and all loving ways of being. And to love ourselves, to love our lives, and to love life, even when we are in the thick of it and feeling like knee deep in mud. And kind of because that's what we're here for. That's what our souls are signed up to know all of it and to experience and feel all of it, and to know that kind of our deepest sadness gives rise and allows us to feel the heights of our ecstasy, and to know that our strength, our great strength, comes from the pain that we've endured, that our metal, METTLE, is forged in the fire of our adversities and our challenges, and we emerge from the flames stronger and brighter, and to know that we are unconditionally loved all the time, that there's love everywhere and we can access it when we access the divinity within us, like just the way that the sun emits its rays, even when it's nighttime and it's cloudy, we don't forget that. And very quickly, in a jigsaw puzzle analogy is like, when you have a Christmas fair and there's a jigsaw puzzle you buy for a couple of quid that someone's donated, and occasionally you buy one where there's a piece, you get to the end and a piece is missing, and you can get annoyed and that missing piece, or you can take a step back and know that, remember the time and attention you put into that puzzle and how much you got out of it, and enjoyment you got out of it, and you can revel in the beauty of the completed picture even with that missing piece, and if anything, because of that missing piece, and we can see the beauty in the perfect imperfection, and that's how our lives are, that they are perfectly imperfect. And this is our heaven on earth when we see our lives through the lens of that love.
Thank you so much. Where do people get the book? Where's the best place to go to get the book and keep up to date with everything that you've got going on?
So they can go to my website. So it's Hannhtat, HANHTAT.com. All my stuff is on there. Some links to social medias on there. You can get my book, look at some of my talks, and podcast posts and stuff. Yeah, so I haven't got that much on there, but you can go there and find me. That's it.
Excellent. Well, Hannah, thank you so much. I will look forward to the next one where we get a bit more tactical. But thank you so much for sharing your journey and your story and all your wisdom today. It's definitely left me with a lot of food for thought. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Luke. Take care. See you soon. Bye.
I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation today with Hanh Tat, where we've been exploring her journey through forgiveness and self-love. Leave a comment below with what you're taking away from this episode and what positive changes that you're going to make in your life as a result. You can leave a comment whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I read every single comment and review and appreciate you being here. I look forward to sharing the next episode of the show with you really soon. See you then.